Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Car Chat podcast. And with us today, we have Magnus Walker. Hello.
Hey, man. Top of the morning. Greetings from a slightly overcast downtown LA. I'm happy to be on the show with you and hope all is well in jolly old England land.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. It's an interesting one, this one, because it's the sort of end of the day for me and the start of the day for you. Can you tell the audience a little bit about just sort of short summary of like who you are and what you do?
Sure, no problem. Magnus Walker, born in Sheffield, July 7th, 1967, left school at 15, was into heavy metal, rock and roll, came to America as a 19-year-old, worked on a summer camp for underprivileged inner city kids in Detroit in 1986. That was a big culture shock coming from Sheffield to Detroit, but in a way there were quite a lot of similarities, former industrial towns that had sort of fallen, past their glory a little bit. So that was how I originally came to America, and then I took a Trailways bus from Detroit to LA, arrived less than 3 miles from where I'm currently sat at Union Station in 1986. And to me, that was heaven. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll. And I've lived in LA since 1986. So spent 19 years of my life in sunny Chef and the past 35 years of my life in LA. So I'm sort of more of an Angelino, but obviously you never forget where you come from. Last 2 years ago, I became a U.S. citizen, which I was very proud of, but I did keep dual citizenship. So got my UK passport and been residing in LA, like I said, since 86. I'm a man with a beard. I'm into music, rock and roll, architecture, and I am a car guy. I describe it as an out of control hobby. Porsche is my passion, my drug of choice, my religion, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, I just like things with wheels that go fast, the journey of life, and sharing fellow stories with car collector people and enjoying the roads and drives around the world. So there's a pretty short bio for those that don't know. I'm Magnus Walker. I'm a man with a beard. And I like coffee.
I love coffee, although I've drunk too much today, so I'm dialing it out this evening.
You got to stay caffeinated. That's my thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think I first came across you with the film Urban Outlaw, which I was just looking it up, and I know it's on your YouTube channel, but I feel like it came out a long time before then. Did it come out on Vimeo?
Yeah, it came out on Vimeo. I mean, Urban Outlaw was a 32-minute short documentary film that was really the vision and wisdom of a Canadian film director called Tamir Moscovici. We became fast friends, but Tamir approached me back in 2011. He'd seen a few articles. Probably the main one I did was in Total 911, the English Porsche magazine, back in 2011. And I had a sort of a rambling thread on a place called Pelican Parts, which is a Porsche forum. And it was literally Porsche hobby, out of control collection or something like that. And I'd been running that since about 2010. And back then, 10, 12 years ago, I wasn't really too computer savvy. But Tamir approached me and basically said, hey, I've seen what you've posted online, read a few articles, but I believe there's possibly more to your story. And Tamir is and was a commercial film director, a Porsche enthusiast. And initially, he just wanted to create like a short YouTube 3 to 5 minute documentary film for his reel. So he shot me an email. We had a couple of phone calls late 2011 and early 2012. We set about filming for 4 days what would become a 32-minute short documentary film. And it was a passion project for Tamir. He literally flew down from Toronto on his frequent flyer miles. I'd never met him, happened to hire a very talented ramshackle crew for pennies on the dollar. And then the next 4 days, we just made this film, which sort of took a life of its own. It's a journey of my life, and Porsche is a vehicle that takes you on the journey of my life. But Urban Outlaw really is my story about having a dream as a kid and moving to America and the challenges that came along. And I navigate through that journey with a Porsche and share my passion through it. And interestingly, we shot the film in February of 2012. And then we released a 3-minute trailer in June of 2012, which went viral. I didn't really know what viral meant because at that time I wasn't on Instagram, wasn't on Facebook. The iPhone had just come out and, all these guys that were flipping around on the phone. I'm like, who are these guys? I've still got my Motorola Razr flip phone. But anyway, the trailer came out and, I'd posted about it a little bit on the Pelican Parts thing. So we knew there was a little bit of a buzz, but the first day it came out, it got picked up by Top Gear. And we didn't know if 500 people were going to see it, 5,000 or whatever it was. So Top Gear sort of put it out there. And then over the next week or so, it just kept getting bigger and bigger because other automotive blogs obviously picked up on it, and it sort of went viral. And that was the first beginning of it. And then Tamir, being kind of savvy, he got the film into the London Raindance Film Festival. And
Oh,
so,
cool.
the film came out, well, it premiered at the London Raindance Film Festival late September 2012. And so we ended up flying to London from LA because, hey, it's a film premiere. You might as well go to your own film premiere. And, it probably wouldn't happen again. And ended up showing in Leicester Square, Piccadilly on a rainy Saturday night. It screened about 10 p.m. to a sold-out crowd. And it was great because people came in from the community. I had a buddy that drove in from the Netherlands. We sold out this screening at the film festival, and then it went online October 15th, 2012. So, it's been out almost 9 years. And the past sort of 9-10 years since that film came out of my life has been a whirlwind of, I've not really changed, but more people are aware of who I am and what I do. And within a couple of weeks of the film coming out, I got a letter from Porsche saying how they'd seen the film. Because in the film, I talk about writing a letter to Porsche and having a poster on the wall as a 10-year-old. And I ended up visiting Porsche and then got invited to all these events all over the world. And I had the time to go and generally just said yes to anything that sounded cool, and ended up on this whirlwind global trek for almost the past 10 years, driving across Australia, driving in Colombia, doing the Emilia, but all of that came from really the film Urban Outlaw. That was the catalyst to getting me out there in sort of the bigger world. I was probably known locally because I'd been building some cars and doing some track days and stuff like that. But Urban Outlaw just sort of opened me up to a broader audience, which then led on to doing other things such as a TED Talk that I did in 2014. I didn't even know what a TED Talk was. And I would say 99% of the people that watch my TED Talk, which is called Go With Your Gut Feeling, were not car people, had no idea what I was about, but there was a little spark of inspiration, can-do spirit that came across in the TED Talk, which then sort of led to a couple of years later, I had an autobiography book come out. But all these things came from the film. The film was the stepping stone, the catalyst into putting me out there in the broader arena. So that's kind of how my journey, at least up to this point, has been over the past few years.
Yeah, I think when it first came out, and I'm just thinking back now, so I remember that happening, and I don't know if at the time, when you might remember this, but whether that many owners of collections ever told their stories. Like I think it's more common now, but it's still not that common of collectors or people in the industry actually talking about their life and their journey and that sort of stuff, and then the cars along the way. Often it's like, here's my garage, and then and then just list of models, and then that's kind of it. Do you think that was part of it, or?
For me, it was very organic. My background, I'm a clothing designer. I had a clothing company, and then I got into the film location business, and I own property in downtown LA, an old 1902 building that I'm selling right now. So the point to my ramble here is I'd been around filming for quite some time, and people had always said, oh, we should make a little film of you driving your cars. And believe it or not, I was not interested at that point. I was a little bit under the radar, other than me controlling this out-of-control hobby collection thing on Pelican. I wasn't really interested in putting something out, but the conversation with Tamir just really clicked and resonated. And for me, it was kind of like, how bad can this be? I'm going to drive my cars for 4 days. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I'd never been in front of the camera, really. I didn't grow up documenting my life on a phone or a 8mm camera as a kid. So it was exciting to me. And I was at the point in my life where it was just exciting. It wasn't like I needed to prove anything or there was a master plan goal. It was very organic, and everything in my life has been very organic. And it really was like, how bad can this be? Let's do it. But Tamir was, he had a vision, and he was very cinematic, and he was able to capture the moments. Like, he'd ask me a question, and obviously I ramble on. He'd say, what does Porsche mean to you? And I'd go on like a 10-minute ramble, and then something would come in. I'd go, Porsche passion, and that became a thing. So he had a very talented team of cinematographers. It was a small crew, literally 5-6 people. And as it was a passion project, it took quite some time because everyone was sort of doing a favor when it came to editing. And you got to remember, we shot for 4 days. So he must have had at least 20, 30 hours of footage. Well, more, because we ended up shooting everything on 2 Canon 5D cameras. So just going through the footage, and finding the good bits, discarding the bits that didn't work. But the final vision was extremely well crafted and extremely well edited, and it was very cinematic. And, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Back then, it was pre-Petrolicious. People weren't making cinematic, artsy films of their collection. Obviously, people have been filming cars forever, but the timing of what Tamir and I did was purely organic. It wasn't planned, but in a way, looking back, it sort of was the catalyst for a lot of content that came after it. The way it was shot, very cinematic. It wasn't just, let's splash on a couple of GoPros and rip around. There's a flow and a pace to the film, a journey. It peaks and flows and takes a breather, and these long cinematic scenes. And it's just a really well shot, well edited documentary film. One of the greatest things that came from it really was getting emails from wives and girlfriends who would email me and say, hey, I watched that and I finally understand what my partner's obsession is about. I'm not a car guy, but I got into your film because it's a journey. And so in a way, the film opened up the car world to an arena that wasn't necessarily in it before. You know, people that might not have been interested or didn't really figure out what it was about, because, you know, car guys tend to be obsessive. I mean, I guess it's a human nature thing. You know, people like to collect, whether it's stamps, guitars, cars, watches, and, you know, sometimes the minutiae of people talking about certain things can become boring to even myself. You know, like sometimes car guys, and I do it myself, we ramble on about certain things that maybe other people don't care about. But Tamir was just able to capture the essence and the pace where he made it interesting for everyone to get into. And I think it did sort of spawn a genre of filmmaking or automotive filmmaking that was possibly a little bit more cinematic, rather than just going down a shopping list menu of, hey, this is, you know, A to Z, you know, because it's really more about the journey and the moments. And so Tamir captured that really well. And to this day, I thank him for that, because if it wasn't for the film, I'd probably not be here talking to you.
Yeah, totally. And getting that first message from Porsche, that must have been a real moment of like, whoa.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because in the film, Tamir had asked me a question. He goes, what do you think Porsche would think of the cars you built? That was literally the question. And I'd go, well, I hope 35 years later they'd be smiling or something like that. Because in 1977, as a 10-year-old, my dad took me to the London Old Court Motor Show. I tell this story all the time. But I came back from that car show with a poster, the brochures. I put the poster on the wall, and I wrote a letter to Porsche saying, hey, I want to design cars for you. And they wrote me a letter back saying, call us when you're older. And then for 35 years, I never thought about it. So he asked me that question in the film. Someone at Porsche had obviously seen the film. They wrote me a letter back, which I actually have on the wall. The second letter they wrote me, the first one was 35 years before. And they said, hey, we saw your film. We understand your passion for the brand, and we'd like to invite you to come and visit us. You know, and I'd never gone to Porsche, you know, the factory, the museum, you know, and it just opened this sort of semi-odd relationship where, you know, I'm not your typical Porsche-looking person. And 10, 12 years ago, maybe it was a little bit more stereotypical of the typical Porsche owner was a certain category of person. Obviously, I didn't fit that category, but the timing of the film was good because within the next year, Porsche was celebrating its 50th anniversary of the 911. So everyone was talking about the 911. And I suppose my story was a little bit interesting because I didn't look like the typical Porsche guy. I was an enthusiast building cars for myself. It's not a business. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not an independent builder or tuner. No one, you know, I'm not working on anyone else's cars. So I think Porsche realized I had this one thing that you can't manufacture, put in a cup and sell, and that's passion. You either have it or you don't. It has nothing to do with, you know, money or where you came from or anything like that. I was just very passionate about Porsche. So I embarked on this kind of weird journey where they started inviting me places, you know, Goodwood Revival and Old Timer GP and Nürburgring, and started including me in various events and getting me behind the wheel of various cars. And then that opened the door to another sort of level of car collector that I hadn't met before. People that own, you know, iconic cars like 911Rs and Carrera GTs and, you know, all types of high-end Porsches, of which I call OPP, other people's Porsches. So, none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the film. Because, you know, I bought my first Porsche when I was 25 in 1992. Urban Outlaw came out 20 years later. So I'd been around a lot of Porsches and I owned quite a few, but I'd never owned a new one. So, you know, it wasn't like I was familiar with people at Porsche and, you know, ordering cars and going into dealerships. They probably didn't know who I was or what I was, but they couldn't sort of avoid the impact that film actually had, because it did have a big, big, broad reach. And still to this day, people are discovering it for the first time and being inspired by it. So the film has a long shelf life. It's going to be coming up for its 10-year anniversary pretty soon. And for me, it was just a pivotal point, part of a certain aspect of my life.
Yeah, totally. And I love that video is a perfect example, that film, of something done well with the right people, put together nicely. It just lasts. Like, you can watch those sorts of videos forever and people will watch them forever. Whereas there's a lot of content now that's made for sort of today and right now, and that has its place.
Yeah.
But every now and then it's nice to do something that might, sit there and be there for a long time. When you got the call through or an email, I don't know how it worked, to do a TED Talk, did someone just send you an email and say like, hey, we want you to do a TED Talk?
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, what's a TED Talk? I literally did not know what a TED Talk was. So they sent, the email kind of went, hey, we've seen you film Urban Outlaw. We're inspired by your story. We think you'd be great to do a TED Talk. And I guess mine was pretty last minute because I only had it was like 2-3 weeks later. So, I tend to say yes more than I say no, but my initial response was, what's a TED Talk? Then they sent me a couple of links. Here's one of Bill Gates doing one, various other people. So I said, sure. And they said, well, you should probably come down. I did mine at UCLA on Royce Hall in front of about, I don't know, maybe 700-800 people on a Saturday. So they said, you should come down on a Friday and sort of rehearse. And I go, well, I don't really work off a script. I don't rehearse. I just ad lib it. I go with it. They go, well, and I said, I've told my story a lot of times because in that 2-year period, I'd done a lot of interviews off the back of Urban Outlaw. It just was this explosion of people interviewing me. Every European country had a car show that was a Top Gear wannabe. All these people would come to the States to film content, whether it was car launches, auto shows. So I had a lot of journalists come through. I told my story quite a few times. So I was pretty comfortable telling my story, or at least I thought I was. But what I had anticipated was my story always gets edited down. People, select the good bits and cut out the rambling. So TED Talk was a bit different. They said, well, you only have 18 minutes to do it. There's, 20 other people. It's scheduled. We're doing 3 an hour. Come down, rehearse. And they also said, do a slideshow. So I grabbed a bunch of images of, me in Sheffield as a 10-year-old, all the way up to how I was at that period of time. And so I rambled on stage for 45 minutes the day before at like 2 in the afternoon. And they said, hey, you're going to have to edit it down. You only have 18 minutes. We suggest you go home and write down your life story. So I drove back, got downtown around 5-ish on a Friday. And remember, I'm doing the TED Talk, 12 hours later the next day. So I wrote down my story, born in Sheffield, blah, 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 hit all the key points and started to try and ramble through my story. And it was difficult for me because I started stammering around. It just didn't flow because I don't work off a script. So at one point, I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to wing it. But I knew if I didn't get to a certain point within 10 minutes of the TED Talk, I was going to run out of time. And in reality, I ended up going 19 minutes. So let me go 1 minute over. And I was pretty nervous because, I left school at 15 with 2 O levels. I didn't go down that career path of going to university. I described myself as street smart, not buck smart. So it wasn't like I'd done live presentations in front of live audiences. So for me, it was an unfamiliar environment, walking out on stage at UCLA, which is a pretty big deal, in front of a live audience. There's no retake. There's no stop. Let me say that again. I'm going to reword it a different way. And I was a little nervous for the first 30 seconds. You can tell in my voice I'm a little nervous. And I crack one little joke. Everyone sort of laughed. And then I settled into my rhythm and continued with my story. And that was it. I sat through probably 8 TED Talks before because I think I was the last one in the morning. And for me, some of it was so technical. I was kind of lost on the technical aspect of what some people were talking about. And I think the relatability to mine is it's just kind of common sense. For me, it was almost like, what's the teachable element of my story? And at the time, I didn't really realize it. But once I started getting a lot of emails from people that had seen the TED Talk saying they were just inspired to do what it was they loved. And there was a common thread where a lot of people were on this path, this journey, going down a familiar course that maybe the parents had done where you have to go to school to be a doctor or a lawyer. And, 2 years into the study, they realized, hey, I hate this. What I really want to do is be a surfer or build surfboards or distill bourbon in my backyard shed or whatever it was. So a lot of the more inspirational emails were from people that said, hey, your talk inspired me to quit my job, change my path, go down, follow my passion, follow my gut. That was the name of my TED talk. So those were more meaningful than people that had sort of said, hey, your cars are cool. You know, it sort of meant in a weird way my story had actually touched someone, this little spark of inspiration. You know, if I can do it where I came from with really no education, but the sort of will to succeed. And ultimately the key is I was able to find things that I was passionate about: clothing, design, fashion, led into music, architecture, and the cars along the way were just part of that story. But I'd found something relatively early that I was passionate about. And I remember as a kid back in Sheffield, you know, go to a career advisor and, you know, where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years? I'm like, I have no idea. And I still don't really know. It wasn't like I had I wrote down the goals or where I wanted to be at certain points of my life. You know, I had certain things I wanted to achieve, but they weren't so much, you know, career goals. You know, I sort of go with the flow. And if something seems interesting, I go down that path if it's interesting to me. So having that relatability through the TED Talk, and it's been viewed over 8 million times, more than Urban Outlaw. And then the TED Talk audience invited me back to host a TED Talk in 2017, where I was introducing people who were doing the TED Talk. But I've had more people come up to me in strange airports around the world that, didn't you do a TED Talk? It still happens to this day. So, you know, it kind of went a long way. And at the time, you know, it was something that I really knew nothing about, but I just kind of winged it. So that's the story behind the TED Talk.
Yeah, it's so cool, those sorts of interactions with people. Like you say, rather than someone just being like, oh, that's a cool car or whatever, which you're like, yeah, great, cool, thanks. It's like, oh, you've got some connection on a much deeper level of, oh, you've helped me, or that was interesting, or you've inspired me to do this. I find those sorts of interactions, they're so much better, so much, like, they're worth so much more than the other ones, aren't they, really?
Yeah, I mean, a little goes a long way. As a kid growing up in Sheffield, I was a cross-country runner. I enjoyed running. And I started at an early age, or maybe almost too early, 8, 9 years old. And I was competing locally, and then, you know, ended up being English schoolboy champion for 1 year, like 78, 70, no, actually 1980. But to this day, I have a certificate that one of my heroes growing up as a kid was Sebastian Coe, who ironically ran for the same athletic club a few years earlier than myself, called the Hallamshire Harriers. And as you know, Seb Coe, you know, 84 Olympic champion, world record holder. But I had this certificate that he signed in 1978, and I didn't win the race. I finished third place. And it just said, well done, Sebastian Coe.
Yeah.
And I'd like posted Sebastian Coe on my wall. So to actually have met him at an early age, and he just did one inspirational thing, well done. And I still remember it to this day. And it just goes to show a little can go a long, long way. So for me, I always try to make time to give back and share stories and how my journey came about, because I still remember Seb Coe 43 years ago signing a certificate, and all he said was, well done. But I remember to this day that it was sort of inspiring to me, and it motivated me to continue doing something that I loved doing, which was running. And later on, I realized, you know, that was probably part of my motivation at an early age. You know, I wasn't necessarily a team sport player. You know, I didn't play football, rugby, or anything like that. Cross-country running, athletics, it's sort of an individual sport. And in a way, I'm still that individual today, where I don't really have a pack of people around me or a posse or a team. You know, it's me and my cell phone and deciding, does it feel right or not? So I'd always sort of been that lone wolf, you know, the loneliness of the long-distance runner type of thing. And that's sort of been part of my journey. And that was the great thing about coming to America. You know, I didn't have to cut my hair and get a real job and, you know, go down this sort of predetermined path. So coming to America, and especially LA, just represented freedom, having come from Sheffield, which was great, don't get me wrong. But LA in 86, it was land of opportunity, sex, drugs, rock and roll, the rest of it. It was everything I'd seen as a kid growing up watching on TV, from Rockford Files to whatever show it was. And, you know, grew up listening to LA music, LA bands. I was into Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue. And it was just, that scene was here. It was alive. It was exciting. It was energized. So, you know, it was just a great place for me to be as a teenager and early 20s, sort of stumbling through life on this journey and making it up as you go along, but not really having anyone tell me. Because, you know, I'd been on the dole in England, living with my mum and dad, never really had a proper job there. Never had my own apartment, didn't even own a car, didn't have a driver's license. So, you know, LA was like, hey, you can do whatever you want to do here. So that was one of the greatest things for me, really.
Yeah, it's cool. And then along the way, as you said, there's been a collection seems to be growing over time of Porsches, and I imagine, have you got other other stuff as well now?
Yeah. I mean, I always did. The first car I bought ever was a 1977 Toyota Corolla. I paid $200 for that. I bought that in 1988 here in LA and took my drive. I drove it around illegally without a license for probably 6 months, which was not a big deal. And then took my license in 1988, 89 here in LA. So that was first car. Second car was a Saab 900 SBG Turbo. Third car was the first Porsche. It was a 1974 slant nose conversion that I bought at the Pomona swap meet for $7,500. And that represented ultimate freedom and, more importantly, like a sense of personal achievement and dream come true, because that was 15 years after I wrote the letter to Porsche, had the poster on the wall. And, growing up in Sheffield, Porsches were not a common sight. So you didn't really see a lot of them. I didn't know anyone that had owned one. I'd never been in one, really. So that was the beginning of, my Porsche collection almost 30 years ago, which has sort of evolved in stages and priorities have shifted. But you got to start with one, and now it's evolved to a few more. And the goal is one of everything Porsche's ever made in a sports car. So front engine, mid-engine, rear engine, air and water cooled. A lot of people, when they think Porsche, they just think 911. Of course, it is the icon. And then you break it down to, you're either air cooled or water cooled, and that's a whole big debate right there. But for me, you need air and water to survive. So I like them all. And to me, it's all about variety. No two ever drive the same. And like I say, people like to collect, I've found, whether it's, like I say, stamps, watches, cars, guitars, whatever it may be, right? Shoes, sneakers. People like to collect things. So I'm no different in that sense. But I've been fortunate enough to be in the position where, one, I have the space, which is a big thing, right?
Yeah, that's huge.
People have cars, a lot of people I know have cars that are dotted all over, I got one here, I got one there, I got a couple there, whatever it may be. You only really need one, but if you have the space and means to have more than one, you can expand. And for me, my timing was always good. And by that, I mean, I bought things that I personally liked before they became trendy, popular, and thus valuable. So, I bought things that, are now worth 10 times more than what I bought them. And that was how I was able to acquire quite a lot of cars, because I actually wasn't spending a lot of money on them. I always did say, up until a certain point, it's changed now, but Porsches were affordable. Unlike Ferraris and Lamborghinis, Porsches got driven, they had high miles on them. And for the most part, they were affordable. And certain ones are still affordable. You can get behind the wheel of a Porsche, in the sense of a Boxster, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, for about $5,000 here in LA. And that represents the best bang for the buck into Porsche ownership if you're not hung up on it having to be a 911. So, that's kind of my goal, is experience variety, no two drive the same. And there's a Porsche for every price point. It's from less than $5,000, but $5,000 gets your entry level into something that's somewhat reliable-ish, whether it's a 924 or Boxster or a 914. And then the sky's the limit. You just go to wherever your comfort zone is financially, and there's a Porsche at that price point.
Yeah, it's a great thing about the Porsche brand. Like, if you want to be in it, you can start at the very cheap, and you can ultimately just keep going. They just keep getting more expensive if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a lot of fun in a $5,000 Porsche, or a $3,000 Porsche, whatever it may be. But, a Boxster is, because I get asked this question all the time, what is the best entry-level Porsche? And I always go, if you don't care about a 911, you're on a budget, get a Boxster. It's performance orientated, it's reliable, they're fun to drive. And, like I say, Porsche for every price point. But I'm not purely Porsche. In the past, I'd owned European sports cars. I don't have a Porsche tattoo, but I have a Super B tattoo there. But one time I owned two 69 Super Bs. I had a 65 Mustang GT 350R Shelby replica, a 67 E-Type Jag, a 73 Lotus Europa. I even had a 79 Ferrari 308 GTB. And over time, I sort of let those go because, I realized each one of those was good at one thing, but the Porsche sort of excelled at pretty much everything. It's like the Lotus was super nimble, but it was cramped. The Super B was great in a straight line, but didn't go around corners, didn't stop good. So little by little, probably 20 years ago, I got rid of everything that was non-Porsche. But ironically, over the past 2 years, I've kind of dipped my toe back into non-Porsches. I currently have two E-Type Jags, and I bought the underdogged, unloved 2+2 automatics. So the first Jag I had was a 67 Series 1. And then recently I got into a 69 Series 2, 2+2 automatic, straight six. And then I found this really awesome Series 3 V12 auto 2+2, but it's got this really great patinaed leather-looking blue paint. And the goal with these two cars is to convert them to 5-speed manual, keep all the patina, but redo all the suspension, underpinnings, and sort of make a sort of rat rod, hot rod E-type Jag. So back in the British car game, I have a 75 AMC Hornet that's a piece of Americana, and a few other things sometimes come through. I recently had bought a 79 Lotus Esprit S2 because I've always loved Lotus. There's something very, very compelling and interesting about them. So
they've got a cool ethos, don't they? How has your sort of personal preference for a car changed over time? Because I know you've got a large variety and you get to drive lots of different stuff now. Has what you liked in a car 20 years ago changed drastically to what you like in a car now? Because I know, I'm younger, but mine has changed in the last 5 years, for example. Yeah,
I mean, it has. I'm 53 now, so comfort is a bit more important to what it was 20 years ago. I think I can sum this story up pretty good. I recently bought a 991 Turbo S 2014. And I wasn't actually looking for one. I'd never really wanted a 991 because in a way, they're like an appliance. It's a very fast grocery getter. And I generally build stuff for myself that's pretty raw. Raw cars are loud, they're noisy, they're uncomfortable. They do all these things that are really fun, but you don't necessarily want to spend 12 hours a day in them. And the 991 Turbo S wasn't something I was looking for. I was actually looking for, like, the newest car up to that point I had was a 996. And I had a few of them. I got an Aero Kit 1, I got a GT2, I got a GT3. So I was trying to go in chronological order. I thought 997 Turbo, I kind of want one. Never thought about 991. That was always going to be OPP, other people's Porsches. So I have a car broker friend, Paul at Auto Kennel, who always gets great stuff. And I told him, hey, thinking about a 997 Turbo, keep your eyes peeled. He goes, you know what? I've got something you're going to love. It's coming in. It's a 991 Turbo S. I go, oh, I'm not really interested in 991. He goes, you're going to love it, though. I go, how do you mean? He goes, it's got 162,000 miles on it. Ooh. One owner, LA car, bought brand new at Riverside Porsche in LA in 2014. The guy paid $193,000 for it. And he commuted from Newport Beach to LA every day on the freeway. So he clocked up a lot of miles in 7 years. At 120,000 miles 2 years ago, he replaced the transmission, which cost him over 20 grand. And the car had 55 pages of receipts. So what it did was it brought the cost down like 30 cents on the dollar. Because most people that have a 991 Turbo S, they don't really put a ton of miles on it. I started looking, the average one was six figures, and the average was 25 to 40,000 miles max. So this one I acquired was literally pennies on the dollar. I'm the second owner of it. And when I first got it, I was like, I don't really like it. It was like there was no drama attached to it. You could floor it, and it's four-wheel drive, and it would just squat down. The rear would push. The front wheels would pull. There'd be none of this would be happening when you put your foot down. And you'd look down and you were doing triple digits. And I thought, well, it's fast, but it doesn't feel fast. You're so disconnected from everything that I'd done before that was raw and loud. And, you'd get a little swirly when you put the power down. The Turbo was like, I wasn't in love with it. I didn't get out of it and look over my shoulder at it. And I thought, I don't really know why I did it. And then about 2 weeks after, Hannah and I took a trip to Moab, Utah to this thing called Easter Jeep Safari. It's an off-road event. And we drove the Turbo S. And on the way back, we came through Arizona, Flagstaff, and we made a day trip of it. And we drove 800 miles in one day. And we were in and out of the car for 13 hours, stopping and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And when we got back to LA, we were not beat up. Our ears weren't ringing. Our back wasn't aching. Our butt hadn't gone numb. And I finally realized this is what that car excels at. You can do 800 miles in a day, probably do 1,000 miles in a day. If I was doing that in this 964 next to me or 277, it would have been uncomfortable. So the long answer to your question is it's horses for courses. If I want to take a spirited blast up my favorite road, Angeles Crest Highway, that's 18 miles from here, I'll take anything. It doesn't matter whether it's air-cooled or what. It's fun, it's exhilarating, it covers all the sensors. It's everything that we love about an air-cooled car that's raw. It's faster than it seems. It's, really exciting, adrenaline runs. It's an adventure. The Turbo S is not that. But if you want to do 1,000 miles or a 500-mile road trip in it, that's where that car excels. Very fast-paced GT cruiser. And it's got all the creature comforts that I never cared about. People would say, does your car have air conditioning? I'd go, yeah, the windows wind down. Does it have a radar? I go, no, it's got a loud engine behind me. Stuff like that. So the Turbo S is the car that you'd want to drive across country in. And ironically, I just drove the new 992 GT3. And of course, I keep comparing it to the Turbo S or even the new 992 Turbo S. And the GT3 is not a car I would want to drive 1,000 miles in a day.
Yeah.
But a 2-hour blast up your favorite road, it ticks all those boxes. But, like the 992 Turbo S got 200 horsepower more than the GT3, and it's a Swiss Army knife of it does everything, as opposed to something that is so niche focused that it's almost impractical. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a long ramble on how my priorities have shifted. I mean, on Sunday, I was driving 277, my favorite car in the LA River. Tomorrow, I'm going to drive a Ferrari F40 press car. So there's always sort of interesting things coming through. So I don't think my priorities, they've evolved, I think. I think they've evolved. To me, I still like saying, hey, we can't go back in time. We can't time travel. But if I want to go back to 1965, 66, I've got that Porsche that I can get in.
Yeah.
And it's antiquated, the big steering wheel that's wood rim that feels like this. It smells of oil and gasoline and everything's sort of antiquated about it. And I like that. So to me, it's the variety. And it boils down to two things. People always ask me about electric cars and autonomous self-driving cars. And what do I think about those? And I go, those are great for commuting. If you live in downtown LA where I do, and let's say you want to commute or you had to commute to Santa Monica, it's 18 miles away. That can be an hour and a half drive.
Yeah.
That's really no fun in a hot rod early 911. You might as well have an autonomous driving car because that's commuting, right? And I'm fortunate enough where I walk to work. So for me, 90% of my driving is pure pleasure. I'm not the guy putting 162,000 miles on a car in 6 years, driving backwards and forwards to work, but I'm putting the spirited blast up the crest on the car. So for me, I break it down to driving's a pleasurable thing for me for the most part, as opposed to a frustrating stuck in traffic commuting thing. So, you sort of have, okay, an electric plug-in hybrid or whatever it may be that's quiet and might even drive you to work. Yeah, it's not engaging, but yet stuck in traffic is not engaging.
Yeah.
So, horses for courses.
Over the last couple of years, I owned a bunch of cars that were all pretty hardcore, driver-focused, kind of loud experiences, and realized all the cars pretty much were the same. They all fit, they weren't the same exactly, but like they filled that niche of something you would take for 30-minute blast at the weekend or whatever. That's, your 1 hour, 2 hours. And then I realized that I had absolutely nothing that was good or fun for a long, go for a long period of time. And so over the last 2 years, I've slowly been trying to sort of push stuff in different directions. And one of the ones, I have a 78 SC that's been messed with. It kind of looks like an ST, uprated engine, brakes, suspension, stiffened, all that sort of stuff. But with a couple of creature comforts like aircon and a stereo and stuff like that. But I find, and you might be a perfect person to answer this question, I think I want to use that car to become something that's probably more old school. So a more of a sort of, maybe like a 65. I had a go in one of the 2-liter race cars, like a 65 race car. That had to be
a lot of fun. Yeah.
Absolutely wicked. And my car is quite grippy, like really quite grippy. So on the road, it's kind of, you've got to be pushing it probably too hard to get it to move around too much. It's just, you've got to be going too fast really. Or it doesn't have quite enough power for the level of grip it's got. And I'm thinking of selling it and then buying something else that's older, maybe messed with a little bit, but less grippy. Have you got any thoughts on a sort of, I'm thinking of like a 65 or 66.
I got a lot of thoughts on that stuff because I've built and still own a lot of short wheelbase cars. At one
Yeah.
time, I had 567Ss, and now down to 2. I had everything from a 64. I had one of every short wheelbase car. I currently have a 65 911. It's the 310th car I ever built. I have my favorite Irish Green 66 911. I have 2 R-inspired short wheelbase 67Ss. One of them's a real hot rod. So the one that's a real hot rod has a 2.5 twin plug motor built on a 67S 2-liter case that my buddy Matthias at Wicked Sixes in Hamburg built. And it's just everything on it is custom. GT3 spec crank, custom pistons and cylinders, custom cam grind. He dynoed that 2.5 motor running on pump gas, dynoed at 271 horsepower.
Ooh.
271 out
That's
of the 2.5. This is a lot. You know, when you think the iconic 73 RS, 2.7, that had 210 horsepower. So if you can get 100 horsepower per liter out of a naturally aspirated motor, you're doing pretty good. So that's going in my narrow-bodied, short wheelbase 67S, which admittedly is slightly stretched. It has long wheelbase rear fenders on it, but so I can run a 7-inch wheel all round.
Okay.
But it's still a short wheelbase car. So it's running a 15x7 all round with a 225/45 Hoosier on it. It's got straight cut custom short gears. It's stiffened, it's lowered, everything's adjustable, 22, 28 millimeter torsion bars. It is super duper nimble and fun. It goes to like 0 to 100 really quick, probably tops out at 120. And there's nothing more alive than that car, because the power to weight ratio, 271 horsepower in a car that weighs 2,000 pounds ish, with no aero, no big grip. A 7-inch wheel is not really that wide by today's standards. That really gets swirly in a straight line. And that's kind of on the way extreme end of hot rod short wheelbase car. I've built quite a few R-inspired cars with 2 liters, 2 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s. And there's nothing more fun than those cars. I mean, in stock form, on how they came with a 4.5-inch wheel or a 5.5-inch wheel with a 165/70 profile tire, those things don't really handle great. But you lower them, stiffen them up. I've got these 22, 28 millimeter torsion bars set up, Bilstein sport suspension, everything fully adjustable, elephant racing, sway bars, control setup and stuff, semi-solid motor mounts, transmission mounts. And then the key for me is a really aggressive compound, like an R compound tire, and then like a aggressive street pad brake compound. So, stopping distance is really short, and obviously cornering speed is up there. But those cars are super duper nimble and a lot of fun. I've seen those 2-liter cars that Tuttle and those guys set up. They're just like completely sideways through a rouge, going up the hill, flat foot, soaring away at the wheel. Those cars are a blast to drive, and they are pretty nimble. Well, they're very nimble, on a certain road, you can keep up with a lot of high horsepower cars that really you shouldn't be keeping up with. Because I always say the road determines the top speed, right? So let's say you're on a road and those turns are, I don't know, call it a 70 or 100 mile an hour road. The GT3 is not really going much faster than you're going. You're probably 8, 9 tenths foot planted to the floor. The GT3 is probably 60, 70%. But cornering speed is, he's not really going that much faster than you. Maybe he's 10 miles an hour faster, and then he pulls you in the straights. But, it becomes this sort of fun cat and mouse. And I'm a big fan of short wheelbase cars. I've always loved them. And that's kind of how I started building these R-inspired cars, which then obviously led to an ST-inspired car, to an STR. One of my favorite cars is I have a 78, the white one with the black hood and red bumper, and so I like that style of car that's still raw, great throttle response, super lightweight, so they are nimble, they accelerate quick, they rev high. You build these short stroke 2.5 style motors, they rev over 8,000 RPM. So they feel like, hey, this is the evolution backwards of the GT3, right? This is all that DNA that went from the 67S to the 67R to the TR, which became the ST, which became the RSR, and then everything sort of went from there. So I've built a lot of those cars, and I like a lot of those cars. But that's not the car I'm going to drive, on that 800-mile trip to Moab. Because at a certain time, like you got these custom short gears, and on the freeway, you're always sort of, not always, but often if you've got a short gear and, you keep a standard fifth, then you're okay. But if you've moved everything down a step, airport gears, fifth gear sort of feels like you're in third or fourth and you want to go one more and that's it, you're done.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of the 901 transmission as well. So I find for me now, I'm building a car for a specific sort of goal. And I find a lot of people tend to overbuild these type of cars. They go down the shopping list of everything that seems great and whammy, and then they overbuild the car for the street. Or, they've got the wrong cam profile in where there's no bottom end and it's all top end, right? Makes all the power above 4,500 RPM, which is extremely hard to live above 4,500 RPM on a regular street in regular driving conditions. It's different on an open track, where the surface is smooth. So, I see a lot of people that possibly overbuild the cars, enjoy the journey, and then when they're done, the car's actually not much quicker than it was before because they sort of made it too much of a track car. There's a happy medium between the streetable track car, right, and then the all-out track car that's just no fun on the street. One where, you've got a cam profile set where you go from throttle transition, idle, you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic and it's nothing, then all of a sudden it zings. That's kind of what I'm talking about. You need something that's easy to modulate if you're going to drive it on the street in traffic.
Yeah, and you don't want to be going round a corner in like second or something. You don't want to drop down to first on that 901 gearbox if you can help it. It's like, that's not a great one. And then just dropping out of the power and you're like, well, okay, now I've got to wait and I'm halfway down the straight before it comes back in again. Yeah,
and then it just wallops. I mean, that's kind of the fun challenge and problem and restriction with early 3-liter turbos. Another thing that I'm fond of, 3-liter early 75 through 77 turbos. That was the holy grail poster car as a kid, right? But you drive them in real world situations, it's not a super revvy car. The gears are very tall, like first gear is like 45 miles an hour. Second gear is 90 miles an hour. Turbo lag is not great. So those early 3-liter turbos, and by today's modern standards, they don't make a lot of power. They're not necessarily nimble. They're not necessarily like stoplight to stoplight fast. They're not necessarily great in the canyons, but they're great on sort of, longer stretches of road where you can really open up and have a lot of room in front of you for when that turbo boost kicks on. Because a lot of times, like in those cars, like let's say I'm in my 78 SC, right? You come up to a left or right hand turn doing 20 miles an hour-ish in second gear. You're staying in second gear. Maybe clutch in, blip the throttle, go around the corner. In the turbo, you got to go, I got to go down to first gear here. Because if I'm going around the corner in a 3-liter turbo in 20 miles an hour and I put my foot down, there's absolutely nothing. The Prius is going to walk away from it. So you have to adjust your driving style. It's like you're on the freeway and you're cruising at, let's say, 60 and you're in fourth gear and you accelerate, there's nothing. So you almost got to go down a second gear, which is really counterintuitive because you'd never be doing that in your SC, right? You might drop to third and just, blip the throttle and go. But turbo, you got to go, I really need to be in second gear here. And I'm doing 60, right? Because I'm just cruising in fourth.
Yeah.
So it's like you always have to adjust your way of driving style based on what you're driving. And I think the 3-liter turbo for me is a great mind adjuster of, I got to go to first gear to go around this corner at 15, 20 miles an hour. I'm not doing that in anything else, but you do it in the turbo.
Yeah, absolutely. I had and this will sound ridiculous. I had an experience exactly like this 2 weeks ago. So I have an F40. And the first
That's one of my
time,
holy grail cars, actually.
I took it on track the other day for the first time in Anglesey in Wales. And
that seems to be a fun track with an ocean view.
It's a sick track from like a filming view, everything, like cool place. And they're super chilled there. Like they're less strict than other parts of the world. And
do they have noise restrictions there on decibels?
Not really.
Okay.
Like it depends on the day, but pretty much not. So my car's straight pipes, competition pipes,
wow.
And is suitably loud. But it's got a really tight section in the sort of the back of it. And I got to this point where I'm comfortable pushing cars on track, like the Porsches and stuff and race cars and whatever, I'll push. That car, I don't want to push it too much because, if something goes wrong, it's quite an expensive repair bill. But I was taking a lot of these corners in second which seemed like about the right gear, but you were just massively dropping out of the boost, like disgustingly so that you didn't really come back in until you're just at the edge of the corner, like coming out the last bit of the corner, and then you get a bit of a fizz as the tires spool up and off you go. But it was that thing of like, well, I think this corner is possible to do in second, like, and keep it on it, but you've got to be so much more committed on the way in than I am comfortable being. And you're like, and it was really weird. Like, there's just certain parts of that track that just did not work. They just didn't work. If you're in first, you're going too slow. Second, you're dropping out of it. And unless there's unless people are like, I don't know, clutch kicking or something to sort of get the boost up, you just drop out and then you'll be like, well, that's it. I'm just going to, it's a waiting game now, and then fireworks down as you go down the road. It was a really interesting, it was the first time I've had that in a car where there's just...
That's kind of one of those situations where, left foot braking, keep the boost up, your right foot's planted, but you're trying to start a bit of speed with the left foot, but you don't want to drop those revs out of the boost range. So I find that's where left foot braking comes. There's a lot of advantages to left foot braking, but in a turbo, that's possibly one of the big ones as well, is that left foot braking, keep that boost spooled. But yeah, F40 is one of my dream cars, one of my top 10 all-time drives. I'm going to tell you this real brief story real quick. Was back in 2016, I got the opportunity to drive a modified F40 in Miami. And my buddy Larry Chan's with me. He's shooting an article for Speed Hunters. We were down there for Racer Champion. So I guess it was like January 2017 is probably when it was. He called me the night before, said, hey, do you know anyone with a cool car we can drive? And I don't know if you've been to Miami, but Miami's like one of my favorite places because the car culture there is phenomenal. But it's all kind of under the radar because there's a lot of sort of South American, money down there, and people that may have a second home in Miami but be from somewhere else, but they've got exotic car collections there, but they're not necessarily on Instagram, so you might not know about them. Anyway, I make a call to one of my buddies who sort of knows everyone down there, and before you know it, I've got the keys to an F40, and we're doing this shoot for Speed Hunters over Key Biscayne, this bridge that sort of drops into Key Biscayne from Miami early Sunday morning. Of course, we've done some rips over it because, as you know, I mean, you own one, but for me, I come from a Ferrari 308 GTB. I had a 79 carbureted one. And weirdly, I described the F40 as like a 308 GTB on steroids in the sense of there's not a ton of shit, right? It's pretty stripped out. It's just what you need. It's raw. And for me, I felt comfortable in it straight away. Unlike, let's say, a Carrera GT, which there's always a big intimidation factor to it. For me, the F40 seemed pretty comfortable. It was just like a way faster, more exciting version of the 308 GT. Yeah. So we'd done these blasts over, and it was like, of course, the one infamous, let's go for one last run. We ended up getting pulled over by a cop. Of course, the car didn't have plates on it. We had no paperwork on it, no insurance on it. I'm on a California driver's license. My buddy Larry sat next to me taking photos. The cop was not amused. He had us on the side of the road for a solid 30 minutes. We finally managed to get a hold of the owner, who was like half a mile down the road. He came over and smoothed the whole thing out, talked to the cop. The guy was like a car dealer. So it was, he had no paperwork in the car, but he sort of had, proof to ownership on him. Anyway, long story short, we ended up getting out of a speeding ticket. The car was never impounded, and that's my F40 story. So how long have you had the F40?
About 5 years.
How did you stumble into that? Was that like, I guess, a bucket list car, right?
It was a bucket list car. And my car is a bit different. It is, you might have seen, actually, there was a white Liberty Walk F40 about, more than 5 years ago, running around. It was in Japan, had an LM body kit on it, had some different suspension, had a big subwoofer in it. Basically, I bought that car for a reasonably good price, and resprayed it, took it back to a company called Zanassi in Italy, put it back to sort of original, but painted it blue. So it's the blue one, and it's got the plate F40 blue. And I've had a wicked bunch of years driving it. And I think at the moment I'm sort of coming to the end of my time with it. I've enjoyed it. I've driven it on track, and I'm just ready to move on to other things. Or I think the value side of it has got to a point where I'm not that comfortable. I like to use my cars, and that stops me using that car. So I'm like, okay, I need to move into other things that I'm happy ragging around.
Priorities have shifted a little bit, but you still got
exactly.
the memories.
And just over time, what you're looking for in a driving experience, or you realize you think you might use something, you buy something because you're like, oh, I'm going to have the best time driving this. And you realize if there's two cars in the garage, I always take my 997 GT3 RS or something like that. Like it doesn't get used that much, even though it's still the poster car, epic, amazing experience.
I have that car. I have a right-hand drive 75 930 turbo. So that's the first year of the turbo. I have a left-hand drive one as well, which is pretty unusual because they're pretty rare cars. Porsche only made 284 of them. Only 32 were right-hand drive. I bought this car in Australia, shipped it to LA 2014-ish. I just never felt comfortable in it. Probably because it's a right-hand drive car in LA. It's the only right-hand drive car I've ever owned. You know, I never owned a car in England. So first right-hand drive car happens to be an uber rare Porsche. Half the time I'm walking to the wrong door to get into it because I'm always used to going on the left. And everything about it is counterintuitive. You know, it's not that you're not shifting with the right hand, you're shifting with the left. It's the seatbelt comes the other way over, the ignition's on the other side. I'm not looking over this shoulder for the rear view mirror. I have to look over that one. So nothing in it is second nature. You know, it's this muscle memory stuff. If I'm so used to rear view mirrors this way, shift this way, seatbelt that way, key here, everything's reversed on it. You know, so it just starts out awkward. I walk to the wrong door to get in. I go, oh, this is annoying. You know, but it's like a pretty rare car. But I've got like 4 others that are more comfortable of the same era. So it's always one of those things that sometimes you chase something and then when you get it, it's not quite what you thought it was. Not that the F40 was that, because I could, I think, live with an F40. I mean, where do you go from an F40? Sick. I mean, is it a Ferrari lateral move? I mean, what are your sort of bucket list cars?
There's another bucket. Well, no, I think generally, and this sort of fits into my wider look at all of the cars, is the more I race or drive on track, the more I realize that I probably have I have more fun. It's a different thing. Me driving on the road now is like road trips and experience with friends, going to visit people, like all that sort of stuff. It's not driving 10/10ths. I don't drive 10/10ths on the road, but I can drive 10/10ths on a track. So I think I would rather shift towards cars that I can do more stuff with on track, probably less valuable, but like those sorts of experiences. Have cars that are great on the road for what, you know, have one that's great for a blast for an hour and a half, one that's more of a GT car, then a comfy family car, and then a race car or whatever. But I'm just shifting away. It's generally the value of that. I think I'm just going down my path. There's other things that are interesting. I really fancy a roof at some point. I don't know when or where or if. I love the idea
of a yellow bird thing.
Yeah, what an unbelievable thing. I love the idea of a Carrera GT, but I don't know whether I would ever do that because it's similar, getting into the similar sort of values again. I just want to try.
Carrera GT seems like 5-6 years ago, they were the supercar bargain.
Yeah.
When their prices were, you know, maybe it's a little longer than 5-6 years ago when you could sort of pick them up here in the States, you know, 300 grand, which is still a lot of money, but you know, now they're like $1 million car. But I remember them being a $300,000 car. And at one point I was like, wow, I got these 3-liter turbos that are worth, you know, quite a lot of money, 10 times what I paid for them. I started doing the math as to how I could get into a Carrera GT for not a lot of money. I go, well, if I just sold 3 of those 3-liter turbos, I'd have Carrera GT money. And I go, I wouldn't be in it for Carrera GT money. I'd be in it for these 3 turbos that I bought when they were worth nothing, right? So that's kind of how my mind thinks.
Yeah.
I'm not buying high-end cars, but you can sort of somehow get your way into them on a certain level. And Carrera GT for me was, you know, I'd driven one. It was one of these experiences where someone said, do you want to drive a Carrera GT? A friend of mine. It was at a car event. Sure, of course you're going to say that. Before you know it, there's like 20 people stood around watching, and it was kind of parked sort of awkwardly where I had to reverse out of a spot, and I'm like, oh, don't stall it.
Yeah.
And because all you ever hear is people storing Carrera GTs, and it's not a good look. And so I just remembered all the articles I'd read about it of, you know, just let the clutch out, don't touch the throttle, you'll be fine. So once I'd backed out of this slightly awkward place without stalling it, After that, it was just one of the most intoxicating drives ever. But you run out of open road, really. If you want to sort of experience everything that does, you don't really get out of second gear, right? Obviously you can go through the gears, but you can only do a certain speed on an open road, and most roads, are not open in the sense that there's traffic everywhere. So it's back to the road determines the speed for me. And recently, my girlfriend and I got ourselves into a 1975 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow.
Nice.
I bought, I'm dating this girl, Hannah Elliott. She's a writer, journalist, writes for Bloomberg Business Week. So we've been dating for almost 4 years now. So she's been my gateway into all this exotic stuff that I didn't experience before, test drives, press drives in, everything, right? Lambos and just high-end exotic stuff. So, other than her being like super compatible and fun and sexy, it's been great to experience our passion together in other people's cars. But for her birthday, I bought her an SL, like an 88 560 SL, and it turned out to have a few more gremlins than we'd anticipated. And it wasn't quite high enough for us. We're both pretty tall, and of course we always have the roof on, and it just wasn't working out. So the independent specialist that I'd bought this car from, I called him up and said, hey, this thing's not quite working out. It's a bit of a lemon. Can we trade it in for a similar SL, similar year, similar price point? The guy goes, sure, no problem, bring it back. So we bring it back down, and Hannah's looking at all these other SLs in bronze and gold and brown and all these cool color combos. I look in the corner, I see this olive green, long wheelbase 1975 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. I'm no longer interested in cars for her. I'm looking at the Silver Shadow. I go, how much is that? And it was pretty close to the price point of these SLs. And here in the States, in LA, it's like SL Capital. They're all over. I dropped my earbud, but they're all over, and you can pick them up you can pick them up from 5 to 20 grand, gets you sort of a decent one. And the Rolls Royce was in the same price point. So we ended up trading the SL and $2,000 into a 75 Rolls Royce long wheelbase Silver Shadow, which is now our daily driver. And the interesting point to my ramble is we'd tell people what we were doing. They'd go, do not do that. There's nothing more expensive than a cheap Rolls Royce. And of course, we paid him no attention. We were like, fuck that. We're going to do it. How bad can it be? Yeah. And I got to tell you the story. We took it for a test drive, and the dealership was in South Central LA, sort of not the best place. And we ended up getting on the 110 freeway south, and we're quite a way south. And we pull into a gas station to swap over so Hannah can drive it. And the car literally died in the gas station. It had run out of gas. We have to call them up. Hey, the gas gauge doesn't work. The car won't start. I think it's out of gas, but we couldn't push it to the gas pump because the thing weighs like 6,000 pounds. They go, okay, we'll send the guy down with a gas can. So there was a sign right there that, hey, the car broke down on a test drive, but we still bought it. And now it's become our daily because the car determines the speed. Like this is 65 going straight in the Rolls Royce. It'll go faster, but it won't go much faster. But there's just something about the car has forced us to slow down. Willow, our dog, loves it. It just smells of Connolly leather. For me, it's nostalgia. And you can pull up anywhere, any hotel or restaurant. And I hate people valley parking. So I'm the guy that'll park around the corner in a loading zone before I have someone valley park the car. But the Rolls Royce, I don't mind it. And they'll leave it out front. No one looks at you like you're a douchebag in a vintage Rolls Royce.
No, you're cool.
Everyone's giving you the thumbs up. Everyone wants to know about it. It's not like we were driving in a new Baller Phantom where you might sort of get judged on that, at least in LA. Yeah. Here, it's just cool. And I find the E-Type Jag's the same thing, even though it's the automatic 2+2, ugly duckling, no performance. There's something very cool about it. So it comes back to the experience of places and faces and memorable moments. You were just talking about it. You want to have your fast car on track, and then you want to do these journeys and rallies and explore places, right, with other people and cars. And that's what I call faces and places type of thing. So it's back to this thing about being all about variety. Sometimes you want to go fast, sometimes you don't, right?
Exactly. And I think when I got my SC, the first time that car, and it's signal yellow, and it's just like a fun little, like most people, you drive through London or whatever, and the amount of people that just come up and go like, oh, that's a cool car. There's no everybody is happy around that car, whether you're in it, driving it, passenger, or just next to it at the fuel pump. Like it just exudes like happy vibes. Whereas if you were in a modern Ferrari or whatever, you know, your Phantom or something, you don't get that. You're not engaging with other people other than they might go, oh, that's a blah, blah, blah. And I love that about it. And I also love, you know, the older cars and stuff like that, where this value like isn't so obvious. It could be niche and expensive, but no one knows. They're just like, it's an old car, and you're like, yeah, it's just an old car.
That's the thing with the Rolls Royce. I mean, you can literally pick them up in the teens, right? You know, so they're affordable. You know, you can't really get too much in the teens that's, you know, got character and soul. And I'm all about character and soul, and that's kind of what new cars lack. You know, they've become appliances. Yes, they're very effective at what they do, but they're also kind of somewhat generic, where certain things look just like other things, right?
Yeah.
But nothing looks like an E-Type Jag or a 75 Rolls or, you know, an air-cooled Porsche from the 70s. I mean, you know, these are things that you don't necessarily see every day on the road either. And people are drawn to them from this aesthetically pleasing look or the sound of it. You know, there's nothing cooler than or more enjoyable than an air-cooled sound. But one of my new pet peeves is, you know, it happens a lot here in LA, usually with Mercedes AMG owners that have got these really loud, aggressive, barking exhausts, and they're doing 25 miles an hour. You know, it's my pet peeve. You know, sound. You know, people associate sound with speed. I get it. We've all grown up that way. You know, this nostalgia of V12 screaming, right, or F1 cars screaming at 20,000 RPM, and then you go get in a Porsche Taycan that's electric, and it's a whole different noise, right? Gear whine, tire whine, suspension creak, flex, you know, whatever it is, road noise, you know, tram lining on the freeway. So to me, I don't necessarily associate speed as much with noise, because the guy in the AMG that's doing 25 and deliberately backfiring and barking and setting off alarms, he's just like, dude, come on, right? Be a bit stealth, be a bit chill here. So maybe that's me getting old. Maybe that's me getting old, because, you know, I've got cars with straight pipes and headers, and, you know, sometimes, you know, the drone becomes one of those things where, you know, you just sort of don't want to be in a certain RPM range.
Yeah, totally. I'm definitely moving that direction. I am more conscious of other people, and if it's a long journey or just any, I just don't want that, like that drone down the motorway. Before we sort of start to wrap this up, there's one thing that's happened recently that I thought is super cool, and I'd love to know a little bit about. You've got a Nike sneaker coming out. This is like peak.
When does this air?
This will be like a couple of weeks.
Do you have a date when this airs yet?
We can work with whatever you're about to tell me. I'll put it after that date. Oh, hello. Nice. Magnus is wearing a pair for the people that are not watching the video.
I wasn't quite expecting this, but it's something that is going to tie back into, remember my Sebastian Coe story from a long time ago, or about an hour ago? Sebastian Coe obviously ran for Nike, and we talked about Urban Outlaw and the catalyst of what Urban Outlaw brought about. So here's the Nike part to the story. There's no time constraint here. You know, we can go as long as we like now. I'm no longer worried about an hour because we're already over it. So when Urban Outlaw came out in 2012, I talked about the Top Gear trailer that came out that first day and went viral. And within that first week, I actually got a email from Sandy Bodecker, who was the president of Nike Action Sports. That's all. Everything Nike does is cool, but the Action Sports division, SB, this is X Games skate. It's the fun stuff. They've got a thing called the Kitchen and blah blah blah. So Sandy Bodecker, Nike Action Sports, was a Porsche GT2 owner, had seen the Urban Outlaw film and said, hey, I'm inspired by your story. I'd love to see if we can come down and tour your facility. And he goes, we're hosting a 2-day design summit seminar for our designers and merchandisers and marketers. We do this several times every year. Generally, we go to a remote retreat, and it's a corporate retreat over 2 days, and we talk about what we're planning for the future and down the road and what Nike's doing. He goes, would you be interested in hosting us at your space in downtown LA? And would you give us a tour? And I'm like, wow, fuck, you know, this thing's like next level. I go, Nike's interested? I go, I'm just like doing, you know, drill door handles. Yeah. And Nike's like thinks I'm inspiring in some way. And you go back to Nike, the waffle shoe, Phil Knight. Nike started in the garage of Phil Knight's house doing waffle sneakers in the late 60s, early 70s, right? So I go, maybe there's a mild connection there of thinking outside the box. So, of course, yes, Nike, you can come down. I'll give you the Dog and Pony 2-cent tour. You can host your 2-day seminar here at the Loft. And he said, do you think it's possible we could screen the film? I said, well, the film's not done. And the seminar was in August, and the film had this release of September. I go, let me talk to Tamir, the director. So I called Tamir up. Hey, you're not going to believe it. Nike's interested in the film. They want to know, can they screen the film? He goes, well, it's not done. It's rough. It's not fully edited. It's not colorized. We don't have the sound right. But sure, yes. So Nike flies him down from Toronto. He's part of it. We ended up screening Urban Outlaw, rough cut, 32-minute documentary at the Soho House in Hollywood. Kind of a big deal thing to Nike. And we go, fuck, like Nike's on this. Something's happening here.
Yeah.
And then, Nike invited us up, gave us, some stuff, but I never went to visit him. And then unfortunately, Sandy Bodecker passed away from cancer in 2018. And we went up there for the funeral. And I met this guy called Pelly, who worked at Nike SB, and he's a Porsche guy. And he flew us up there, and it was just kind of cool to visit the campus, even though it was under sort of sad, tragic circumstances. We toured the facility, and they had a Sebastian Coe exhibit there. I go, wow, this is like full circle of 2018 when I went to Nike. Seb Coe signed my certificate in 1978. Do the math how many years later that was. And it was just sort of this full circle moment, pretty special. And he said, would you be interested in doing a sneaker with us, with one of our pro skaters? I go, well, I don't skate. He goes, it's okay. We kind of like your attitude. And Ashad's a fan of yours. He's a Porsche guy. So we ended up collaborating. Like, these things take time. It's a conversation. You don't hear anything from 6 months. 6 months become 9 months. Are we still doing it? Yes, we're still doing it. We had to push it back. We're scheduling it, for such and such a date. And so the shoe's going. I meet Ashad last March, but we haven't done anything on the shoe yet, but we're doing a shoe. And ironically, on Sunday, I don't know if you've seen my recent little Instagram post, but I had my favorite car, 277, not the slant nose Hot Wheels one, but the real one, down in the LA River. And I was filming the promo for the video. So this is dated March 25th. This was my first sketch for the Nike sneaker. This is dated April 2nd. This was my second sketch for the Nike sneaker. And I'm not one of those guys that's good on Photoshop or Illustrator. And all my cars that I've done up to this point, I see them in my mind and it goes to the car. There's no CAD illustration, no livery that's printed out, nothing's wrapped. I don't contact an art guy who mocks it up for me. It's done this way. Yeah. So that was the initial sketch. And then I'll show you the shoe. So initial sketch. There's the insole for the shoe.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Here is the very first sample of the shoe.
Oh, sick.
The very, very first one that came to me.
Oh, the inside is so cool.
Takes time to get samples. So here's the one I'm wearing.
Nice.
And then I will walk you through the shoe.
Oh, yeah.
So the inside of it is tartan. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. It's like a bluey green tartan.
Right side has blue tartan. This side has red tartan. And then the shoe is designed to distress. So let me just grab one more thing. I got to move this laptop because, believe it or not, the computer is on the Nike SB box.
Nice.
I've got it resting on. Let me move everything around. The Nike SB box. And then what comes out of the Nike SB box is this. So this is actually the shoe.
Ooh.
These ones I'm showing you here I've been wearing and are already beat up. So the shoe is designed like the car to distress. So initially 277 was gold. So 277 is gold. There's still gold paint in the
Yeah.
front of the car. It's been painted green. It's been painted several shades of white. So the goal with the shoe was the shoe would take on the character of the car and distress. So the shoe has been made to distress. This one has obviously been quite well distressed. But even the shoelaces have the Urban Outlaw logo right here.
Oh, cool. So have you been distressing that, like actively distressing it, or have you just been wearing it?
A combination of both, because I knew I was making the video. So the video is a combination of everything that I just walked you through, of me talking about the story. Then we bring in a Shod Ware, who's their pro skater. So there's footage of him skating. There's footage of us collaborating, talking about the shoe. The shoe comes with red, white, and blue laces that you can see here.
Yeah.
And then we go drive, and I get a shot, driving 277. So this is all literally happening right now as we speak.
Yeah.
I shot the video on Sunday. The shoe comes out when this says the shoe's already out. The shoe comes out on the 19th. So we've got to make sure that everything we're talking about here doesn't get leaked, because up to this point, not many people know about this. So this happened organically. Cool. When I look at stuff like, got my label here, got my name there with Nike. Cool. It's got my, this is sort of a bit of a big deal for me. So all the elements that I'd done on the sketch, obviously they scaled back. They just said, put whatever you want on it. And then, they sort of scaled back from there. But there's the Union Jack on the back. You look at the base sole. There's the base sole. You look at the insole. It didn't drastically change.
Oh.
And this, like everything I've been talking about, just happened organically.
That is so cool. It's like peak.
So, what's that?
Peak collaboration, like Nike shoe. Doesn't get much better.
I mean, I've done stuff with Hot Wheels. I've been designing Hot Wheels for the past 5 years. It started out with one Porsche 356. Now it's over, 30 cars. I've done a little bit of stuff with various other people, but this is kind of, for me, bit of a next level thing.
Yeah.
The shoe had been under wraps. I'd been working on it for almost 3 years. Obviously, it doesn't happen every day. And then just last week, it sort of got leaked to Hypebeast sneakers, and people still don't know much about it because it's really been under the radar. But yeah, there's the story of the Nike SB 277, a Shod collab,
which will be
shoe.
Out when this airs.
It'll be out, and possibly, knowing these sneaker drops no longer available because they're going to be hard to get, I think.
How many are they going? Have they said how many they're going to make?
10,000 of them, which that's low. For Nike, that's low. Usually they're doing boatloads of stuff and it goes to Foot Locker. So that's how many will be out there, and they're actually.
Do you get like a lifetime supply? Because especially if they distress.
Time will tell. I've already got quite a few pairs. For me, I'm used to wearing things that are black, so actually having a shoe on there that's, even though it's beat up, is red, white, and blue. But it's great because it's the first time in a long time they've actually done an SB Dunk that's canvas and leather. So really came out super cool. And this is one of the things that I'm super proud about. So
I'm loving that tartan on the inside.
The tartan on the inside. I just wanted to sort of bring in a little bit of the punk rock element, the DIY. Like this is the exact tartan that I have on some of my cars. Ironically, that Hot Rod 67S actually has the exact same tartan on the inside. So it was just cool to bring in those design elements based around the car and end up with something like this. Would never have occurred to me. It's not like I got a PR team. I spoke earlier on. It's just me and the iPhone getting stuff done. And I think in a way, it becomes approachable and relatable. It's not like I said, okay, I need a Nike collab. Let's get in touch with Nike and see if we can work this thing out. These things happen organically, and most of the time it's just a matter of seeing it through, being super patient, not rushing stuff and waiting for stuff to happen. So that's going to be one of the highlights of 2021. I also have a 3rd edition of my book coming out that we're working on. And then I'm doing a pretty cool coloring book, which will be out when this comes out. Where it's
nice.
Photos of my cars that have sort of been rendered black and white, so you can color them in. It's the Magnus Walker coloring box, and those are a couple of cool things I'm working on.
That's something a bit different.
I got a question for you. You were talking about the F40. You got the SC hot rod. What else do you have?
I've got a 997 GT3 RS.
Okay.
Gen 2.
Well, that's everyone's fave.
I've had that 8 years now.
Okay.
Something like that. And I've got a Radical race car, SR3.
Okay.
And that's it. Oh no, and I've got a little electric car, a Peugeot E208, which is our sort of city car, town, drive around, less polluting. And then I've gone a bit mad and bought a 812 Superfast as a GT V12. Can drive a lot. The view with that is to put a decent amount of miles on it. It's got lots of luggage space. Use it. Enjoy that sort of engine before they disappear.
I always say, as long as we can still get oil and gasoline, we're still going to be able, hopefully, to drive internal combustion cars. I always use the example of Jay Leno, for me, the greatest car guy I've ever met, I think, out there. And he still has the ability to have a functioning steam car.
Yeah.
1902, and I've been in the car with him. He owns 6 or 7 of these 1902 white Stanley steam cars. And the point to my rambling is, he's found a way to make some completely antiquated prehistoric technology of a steam car street legal in LA. So as long as we can still get oil and gasoline, hopefully there'll still be people tinkering around with internal combustion motor cars. But we are on this pinnacle, right? The automobile's been around for the better part of 125 years, and all of a sudden, overnight, call it the next 5 to 10 years, in certain places, internal combustion cars won't exist or won't be allowed on the street, right, to a certain degree. I don't think this is going to happen overnight globally, but in certain cities, especially European cities, it'll probably be implemented way quicker than it will be in, Mexico, for example, possibly something like that. So I think it is a valid point of, you hear about Lamborghinis bringing out a hybrid by the end of the decade. They're going to be all electric. Porsche, we know where they're going. One of my mild gripes with the new 992 GT3 is I believe they've maxed out the performance potential of that 4-liter motor, or they've realized this thing is not going to have too much more shelf life. We're no longer going to develop it any further due to emissions constraints or whatever it may be that we don't know that's happening behind the scenes. But to me, that car lacks mid-range bottom-end torque. It doesn't have a lot of it. And yes, it's great when you're in the twisties on the revs, but, I was caught out on the freeway where I'm, cruising at 70 in 6th gear. It's a PDK, I floor it, drops to 3rd seamlessly, makes all this noise, needle revs around. But I'm not pushed back like this. And I look down, it's super loud and clatter and everything's happening. And I look at the speedo, I'm not actually going ridiculously fast. And I guess the point to my ramble is it seems that that's performance on that particular car has been maxed out. Why? Possibly because, we're not, this is going to be phased out in the next, the 993. What is that going to be? We don't know, but, it might not be what it is today.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they're holding, they know that they're not going to have too much time maybe to develop that engine, and they know they've got 1 or 2 more cars to come out, and so they're the next GT3 RS will have 10 horsepower more or whatever, and it will just sort of keep going up the chain. It's interesting your point about the torque, because that's the only, it's a little problem, minor gripe I have with my GT3 RS is the low down torque, and on a track or anything like that, not a problem. Not a problem at all. Yeah. On a twisty alpine road, you're in that situation where you're over the top of first gear, you're too fast for first gear, but second, you're sort of not having that torque. And I got to drive, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, and also another car. I got to drive the 4-liter, so the 997 4-liter, and that just had a chunk more low down torque. And that was so much better. Someone I had on the podcast recently, who I believe is a friend of yours, Alex Ross from Sharkworks.
The blue Sharkworks orange wheel car. That is, you want to talk about torque? That's the car. That's the car Porsche I'm not going to say should have built, because there's reasons why they didn't build it and why Sharky did and why he was able to get that torque out of that performance package. And I know it took him quite some time to figure that out, where it wasn't pulling itself apart. But when he solved that problem, and I drove that blue car back in, I don't know, 2015, 2016, that was like, this is it. This is the car right here, because it has that torquey bottom end, which I think the new car lacks. And, you look at the new GT3, it's the exact same performance cut out of the power plant that's in the 2019 Speedster. And I thought the 2019 Speedster lacked bottom end mid-range torque. So the performance from that motor has not evolved from the 991 Speedster. And remember, the 991 Speedster concept, they debuted on the 70th anniversary, June 8th, 2018. And it came out as a 2019 model when the 992 was already out. So it's like, they were bringing that out in the next generation. It's like kind of odd. Why are they bringing a Speedster 991 out when we're already into 992? So the fact that the new 992 GT3 has the same engine output exactly, 502 horsepower, and I think 346 foot-pound of torque, as the last generation Speedster, the performance from the power plant hasn't evolved. But let's go around the Nürburgring 17 seconds quicker is all due to ground effects and double wishbone suspension, 5-link rear multi-end, rear steering, right?
Blah, blah.
Yeah, all that stuff, which is great. But how many people are on the Nürburgring? It's that stuff is not helping you in everyday world on the freeway when you've got a bit of open road stretch and you're not necessarily in the max RPM rev range, and you're in that low power band, but you don't have max torque, because that comes a little further up at 6,000 or wherever it comes up.
With the 992 as well, it's a heavier car. It's not a lot heavier. They've done a lot to lightweight, which is another thing I think we should talk about a little bit. The car's got a bit heavier.
The exhaust is like 22 pounds lighter or something, right? And, this is lighter and that's lighter.
They've removed the windows. They're now plastic, all that sort of stuff. But because of that, it's a bit heavier. So there's a bit more inertia before it gets going. So that, like if it was 500 kilos lighter, obviously that power plant would be not a problem. It would seem really torquey. But because the cars are slowly getting heavier, it takes a bit more for it to get going.
Yeah, I mean, they have a wider track, which is wider rubber, as you know, which is more resistance at lower speed inertia, right? So they're kind of spinning around a little bit. They'll talk about the exhaust is 22 pounds lighter, which it is, and we've got light saving here, but, everything else is sort of a little bit heavier, right? And it's still using the same PDK 7-speed transmission from before, but the 992 is now an 8-speed PDK transmission. And, we go around the Nürburgring 17 seconds quicker in PDK, and you go, well, what's the manual time? But they don't record the manual time, right?
Yeah.
We just want to be right under 6 minutes, 59.57, whatever it is. Lars Kern, 2 thumbs up, did really good. That's an awesome performance thing. But for me, an everyday driving thing, it's the GT3 has always been a look at me car, and I've got one. I've got a 996 Gen 2. I want a 996 Gen 1. You can't get them in the States. I like the beginning of everything, and I do like the evolution all the way through. But one of my pet peeves, really, and maybe it's just an LA thing, but you go to your Cars and Coffee, and there's literally 12 guys in GT3 RSs in paint to sample look at me colors, and you go, well, you don't really stand out because you all pick the same sort of shade of paint to me sample, right? What really stands out is a white one that's not paint to me sample, look at me color combo. And you go, well, how many miles do you have on your GT3? Oh, I got a buddy with a Speedster with 2,000 miles on it. Why don't you drive it? I don't want to devalue it. I don't want to put miles on it. Well, doesn't that kind of defeat the object?
And that's also the flip. Like, if you've got a car, I don't understand this attitude of, if you can get, in the UK, if you can get one of these cars, you're basically sitting on a guaranteed profit. Now, you could look at it that way and go, I could sell it and take the money. Fine. You can do that. But if you're going to own the car, that, to me, an appreciating car, or a car that's appreciated, is the one you should drive. You should drive it, the living shit out of it, because when you've done with it, you've still made some money. So why are you driving other stuff that might depreciate? It's an interesting
it's a slippery slope. I think this problem for Porsche, and it comes back to, remember me talking about, you used to see a lot of high mileage Porsches as opposed to low mileage Ferraris and Lamborghinis. it's kind of shifted around a little bit. And it all started for me back with the 2018, with the 918 program, right? Where, there were certain special things where if you had a 918, you were going to be first on the list for that. And they were becoming a little bit like Ferrari. It almost seems like the 918 came out too early. It didn't necessarily get glowing reviews to begin with when the battery was in the passenger seat, going back to 2011, 10 years ago. And, it was on the cover of a lot of magazines. And when it finally debuted at the Frankfurt Auto Show in 2013, I was there. I was like, this thing's already been out 2 years. It's not so much new in a way. And not to take anything away from the 918 because it's great, but the new GT3 is only 2 seconds slower around the ring, right? So technology has come a long, long way. But my rambling point here is going to ramp up to 2015 and GT3 RS. Porsche made a lot of those, like 7,800 of them. And it was on the cover of everything, and it became the car to have, and people were buying them and flipping them for whatever it was over sticker, and dealers were, not giving customer allocations unless you were paying over sticker. And people just weren't driving them. I have a guy in LA, his business is car storage. And he told me last time I spoke to him, he had something like, it might have been 3 or 4 GT3 RSs from that era, and not one of them had more than 1,000 miles on them. So it was like all of a sudden Porsches are not high mileage driven cars because to a certain degree, I think the owners that are coming in as first-time Porsche owners are new to the mark, and they're coming from elsewhere. We might own a Lamborghini, a McLaren, a Ferrari. They're buying their first Porsche. So these guys are used to a car at this level. They're not buying the entry-level Boxster, right? We've got to be on a similar level to whatever it is we're driving. Call it a McLaren, Ferrari, Lambo, right? So we got to get the GT3 RS. It's king of the hill, top of the line, right? We got to get that car, and we're going to pay over sticker, and the price is going to be whatever it is, 200, 300, 400 grand at that time. But they're not driving them, or they're not driving them that much, which is back to my 2014 Turbo S with 164,000 miles on it now. That was a car that was built to be driven. So you kind of go, why are people not driving GT3s? Is it because everything we're talking about, they don't want to put miles on them to devalue them, partially here in LA for sure, or back to, I don't want to do the 2,000-mile road trip in the GT3.
I think it's coming back to that more and more so.
It's a combination of those two, I think.
Yeah. And specifically, I think I haven't driven the new one, but sort of picking up what different people have said and all that sort of stuff, and the new revised suspension and the way they've had to make it lighter. So they've removed some sound deadening and all that sort of stuff. The thing I loved about the GT3 as opposed to the RS is it was always the one that had still had the phenomenal engine, but you could drive, it was a lot more usable day to day because it had the sound deadening, didn't have the plastic windows, all that sort of stuff. But with this generation, they've removed that.
Yeah, it's almost in stock form, I think, too racy for the street.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we know Porsche is going to roll out the Touring because we've seen the success of what the GT3 Touring has. Yeah. And, today the GT3 Touring in the States is the GT3 that really is, you've got to pay a lot over to get one. The GT3 RS has sort of come down. It's dropped quite a lot from where it was. The GT3 is now you're paying the premium to get the GT3 Touring. So it makes you think, we know the GT3 Touring is going to come out. We know they're going to do a GT3 RS. How much racer is a GT3 RS going to be? It almost seems that the stock GT3 is notched up possibly a step too far in between towards the GT3 RS. And of course, the swan neck rear wing uprights are polarizing. The front lower bumper diffuser splitter is polarizing because it's kind of aggressive looking. Before that was all one color, right?
Yeah.
Now it's matte black on everything you see is the shark blue, so it just really stands out. It's almost, I think, almost too extreme. It's like, how are they going to tone that down for the GT3 Touring? So it's interesting. I know people that have got every GT3 up to this point. I go, well, do you have an allocation for a GT3 992? No, I'm going to wait. I'm hearing I'm going to wait. So we'll see. Obviously, the fanboys are going to be all over it, but it'll be interesting to see what the speculators do because, if they're still in the game, I'm not a fan of people buying cars and flipping them, but hey, you can do whatever you want, right? You own it. Do whatever you want. So it's going to be an interesting time, I think.
It is.
But maybe that step has evolved too much towards the RSR on the GT3 for all the reasons that we just spoke about.
Yeah, it's the first one in a while that I've gone, I don't think I would buy that. And that links into with all of the other things that, have changed. Like, I want to use my cars on the road. If it's a race car, it's a race car. Okay, get the RS if you want to use it as a hardcore track car, but the GT3. And if I kind of hope they do, but I'll be annoyed if the touring, which is the one I would sort of lean towards for road use anyway, if they make that the softer, a little bit heavier, more sound insulation, all that sort of stuff, perfect. But it would annoy me because it then makes that car even more unattainable. The one that you're like, that's the one I want, is basically impossible to get hold of at that point.
Yeah, I mean, and then it raises the question, they talk about building these cars for the enthusiast, but you just hit the nail on the head. The enthusiast might not be able to get it. That was the problem with the 911R, right?
Yeah.
It's built as the enthusiast car, but the enthusiast probably can't get it because the speculators, because they had a 918 and whatever came before, or the guy that had a Lamborghini and now he's, got the money and the means to get that, they just become more unobtainable and relatable for the average achievable goal, I think, which then also raises the question, how many flavors of 911 do you need, right? There's, the turbo, non-turbo version of everything we know. Then you can get the 911R, the 911T, you can get the GTS. They're all sort of same but different, slightly different variations of it. So maybe it's good that there's a variety for everyone, or maybe sometimes less is more.
Yeah, I think less would be more. Like Carrera S, then you want an amazing engine in a road car, and then you want a hardcore track car. 3 models, and then maybe a turbo for a turbocharged experience. I know we've got that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Recently, I drove the 992 Turbo S, right? So I've got the last generation. The new one's got like 750 horsepower. And then I got the 992 Carrera C2S. So 2-wheel drive, one step above base model. And this is where it gets really interesting. The spec on the 992 C2S is almost identical to my 2002 996 GT2. So 20 years ago, 996 GT2, this was king of the hill.
Yeah.
By today's standards, one step above base model 992 is almost the same spec as the king of the hill. This is how far they've come. And that's probably enough car, really, for the street. Even though the 750 horsepower Turbo S is, the new king of the hill. It's just kind of like interesting to me that one step up above base today is the equivalent of GT2
it's mad.
20 years ago.
It's mad. Yeah. And the performance of that car, like that's quicker than my GT3 RS, probably by quite a margin.
Yeah. So then it becomes, how engaged you want to be. Back to the new GT3, you got to put the work in there to get it out, which, for the most part is really enjoyable. But yet here we're sort of, critiquing it a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Right. Well, I normally wrap these up with 5 questions.
All right. I guess we're approaching the end.
Yeah, we're getting there. Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
Most memorable? Is this one of the 5 questions? It's a tough answer. Probably, I have 3, but I'm going to try and nail it down to 1, but I won't. I did Mille Miglia in 2019 in a Mercedes Gullwing with Mercedes support. That might be the one because, it's a bucket list thing. You get there. Hannah and I decided, I was fortunate. I got to drive. Hannah did the difficult job, which was the navigation. I don't know if you've done the Mille Miglia, but
I've not done it, but
tricky. The road book's in Italian. We go to the driver's meeting. We see all these people with, they've got the book and they've got, yellow highlighter markers and little tabs on certain things. And we're like, these people are taking this really seriously. And we decided before day 1 that we were going to have fun. We weren't going to sweat the details. We were going to run our own race. I always say with the Mille Miglia, if you want to see Italy and experience a Dolce Vita, don't do the Mille Miglia because you don't see any of that. You're in the car a minimum of 12, 14 hours a day, minimum. Like, you got to get to the event, starts at 7 or 8, whatever time your start time is, but you're not done until 10 at night at the end of the day. So it's a combination of you're either rushing from one place to the other, you got lost, you followed someone else even though you know you shouldn't, he made a wrong turn, or you get there early and you hurry up and waiting and trying to play the stopwatch game so you cross over the line within the time period you're supposed to be there. So it's this kind of stressful thing, even if you're not competing. It's like, it's not a closed road. You're in Italy. Everyone drives like a maniac. There's, a roundabout every 100 yards and buses and tractors and, thousands of people there. The greatest thing about Emilia Emilia really is the people, or are the people. When you pull into these remote villages, like day one's a blast, day two's a blast, day three's a slog. It's like, why are we doing this? It's nuts. It's raining. It rained the whole time when we were there. But you pull into these villages at like 9 o'clock at night, you're blurry-eyed, you've been in the car, you're hot, you're sweaty, you're wet, you've too many exhaust fumes and the energy and the emotion. And then you sort of, you're like, seat time, you drained a bit, but you get into the village and everyone's cheering and honking. You go, this is the greatest thing about the Emilia Emilia, the people. So there's one. Emilia.
Absolutely. It sounds like an amazing thing. And everything I hear about it, and I've done one kind of crazy road trip in Italy that sort of had a bit like Italy in nice cars on that, something like that, is unlike anywhere else in the world. Like the rules are just different. It's quite an experience.
You get in the zone with this red mist, and to begin with, we all, I guess, are spirited drivers up to a certain point. And you see one guy cut into the other lane into oncoming traffic, and there's a cop in front of him, and the cop doesn't stop him doing it. And then you go, oh, that's how it's going to be. Okay, we'll do that as well. So then you dive bomb down, and of course, you pass a bunch of cars, and then no doubt you get to like the roundabout, of which, it's 1,000 roundabouts is what I call it. You got to brake late, try and get in. Of course, they're not going to want to let you in. They would sooner you have a head-on collision rather than let you in. So you just end up in that pace. It's funny. Like, it's great. When we did it, we were teamed up with Bernard Mayer, the F1 pace car guy, and he was driving with the Beastie Boy dude. So those were our teammates. It was like, wow, this is awesome. We're driving slightly manic in someone else's multi-million-dollar car. And at the end of the day, you just turn the car over to them. They say, is everything okay? Yeah. I go, yeah, the brakes are still stuff. It doesn't stop great. The library axle you got to get used to. People go to me, what's it like driving a Mercedes Gullwing? I go, kind of like an E-Type Jag that doesn't stop as good. 4-speed box, kind of torquey, long gears, but the E-Type Jag stops better. At the end of the day, when you're exhausted, you just give it to the mechanic. He fills it up. Next day, you keep going. So day 3 was like, wow, this is a slog. Day 4, you're like, hey, we did it. This is the world's greatest thing. So that's how I sum up the million.
It sounds pretty wicked. Next question. Yeah. This is going to be tricky. 5-car garage, unlimited value.
Whoa, this one's good. Saab 900 SPG Turbo, just because I want one. Car number 277. F40 Ferrari. Mercedes Gullwing, just because it's iconic. And then probably the 75 Rolls-Royce that we already have. I think that's a 5-car garage, right? That's a
great 5. And that was picked out quite quickly. I'm impressed.
I don't overthink it. If you ask me tomorrow, it may be a different 5, but those are the 5 that are sort of in my mind right now.
And that's the great thing about these sorts of questions is like, it changes. 5 minutes later, you'll be like, it's different.
Yeah, there's no right and wrong answer here.
Yeah, exactly. If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life and you're allowed a $500 thing on the side, you can tell me what that is if you want. But yeah, you're only allowed one car plus a $500 banger on the side.
See, that's actually a good question, because everything that we've talked about is mildly compromised in some form or another. One of the things I really like is my, 20-year-old Chevy van that's parked outside. It's kind of practical. It's kind of under the radar. It's comfortable. But I'm not going to say a 2000 Chevy van. I mean, I honestly don't know. One car for the rest of your life.
You have one car, and then you've got $500 for something else.
All right, one car for the rest of my life. Probably my 1976 930 Turbo, just because that was the one that started the love affair with everything. And then the $500, you can't buy much for $500, but I did buy a 77 Toyota Corolla for $200. So I don't know if that answers your question, but 76 930 Turbo.
Interesting. What do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment?
Well, that's a great question. I'm doing this show for Haggerty called The Next Big Thing, which is sort of that question in a way.
It's a very good show for those people out there.
Yeah, I'm currently working on season 2. I'm super excited about it. I shot 5 episodes in and around New York last week. I'm shooting this Sunday, the next 5 here in LA. So there's certain things that are on the list. The current undervalued car, I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, I would say Dodge Viper. For me, it's a car I actually want. I think here in the States, they're all undervalued. I don't know what that is in the UK, but Dodge Viper represents a lot of bang for the buck, I believe. Let me think what else I'm shooting at. I'm just going to say Dodge Viper. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to overthink it. It's my opinion today at this time. So.
Dodge Viper's quite a good one, and it's one that doesn't really translate over here because you can't really get them. Whereas in like the States, they're everywhere, and you get loads of performance, design, everything for not that much.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick them up here for like 40, 50 grand.
Final question. Most interesting car to you at the moment? What are you looking up? What are you Googling, researching?
Okay. I'm back in Ferrari mode. This one's for the Tifosi, the Prancing Pony fans. Season 1 of Next Big Thing, I was super excited to drive a Ferrari 308 GTB4 Dino. And after I drove it, I was still excited. I'm kind of maybe possibly even more excited today than I was then. But I realized at the price point where they're at, and these used to be cars that you could buy here in the States for 10 grand. I'm talking 20 years ago, but nobody wanted them. But now they're at this price point where when it comes to Ferrari, call it in the US right now, the 50 to 70 grand price point, you can get the 308 GT4 Dino, which is tractor-like and antiquated, nimble-ish, but not really fast. Same price point, you can get a 355, so that's the last of that, call it poor man's baby Testarossa, wedgy design. Or you can get the first year of the Ferrari 360. So, I'm kind of thinking one of those three, just for pure driving pleasure. But all three of them are different, right? But they're all sort of in the same price point. There's a 70s era, and then there's a last of the wedgy 348, 355. And then the 360 really is the beginning of everything, which comes up to one of my favorite Ferraris that I've driven recently is the 488 or the F8 Tribuno, which I think, is a really cool car. And that DNA really can sort of take it back to the 360, and before that, the 246 Dino. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I mean,
it's a really interesting period that I think at the moment looking, you said, okay, well, if you sell your F40, what would you buy? And I think the reality is I would like to try out loads of different things, like not have it all in one, allocate all the money to one thing. And one of the cars that I look at and I go, those are damn cool, is a manual 3855. Yeah, I just look at them and go, they sound amazing, they look cool, they're very of their time, and they're relatively reasonably affordable now as well.
That car is not dated at all. I mean, Ferrari's interesting. There's a guy here, you probably know him, Ferrari collector David Lee. He's got the Ferrari 5, the 288 GTO, F40, F50, Enzo, LaFerrari, and then everything in between. And, a 288 GTO is a car that I kind of like.
Yeah,
cool. I always wanted, when I owned the 308 GTB, it was a 20 grand car. And at the time, I kind of wanted a 512 Boxster. And admittedly, this is like 25 years ago, at least. But back then, a 512 Boxster was about a 50 grand car. And 50 grand to me was all the money in the world back then because the 308 was 20 grand. So, it was 2-3 times the price of that. But it was kind of like that evolution of the 512 Boxster BB Berlinetta. It was like the 308 GTB on steroids, which was kind of weirdly how I described the F40, even though it's not. You know it better than anyone, but weirdly it kind of was to me. So there still is a charm about Ferrari. There's something about it, right?
There is something about it. I love the cars, and then I kind of don't like the brand, which is weird. I can't really explain it.
I can. It's a Ferrari ball cap. It's a Ferrari T-shirt.
Exactly.
Ferrari glasses. Ferrari driving gloves. A Pilati Ferrari shoes. And then the little badge here that goes, Ferrari Owners Club. I'm Bob Smith. That's how I sum that up.
Exactly. And that is not me. I'm just not that person.
I get it.
I don't think I will ever own a red Ferrari just because.
Well, that's the tricky thing with, I'm looking for this Ferrari, or I was the 308 GTB4, and I don't want a red one, right?
Yeah.
And it's like any other color's got a premium over red now. So I thought, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way around. Let me just buy a red one. I'm going to paint it, right? I'll paint it any shade of color I want. I want the two-tone Berlinetta body thing. So, silver, with a sort of oxblood red leather interior with a black bottom Berlinetta trim would be the way to go. I go, why am I worried about if it's red? Just spray over that thing. So that's why your car's cool, because it's not red. Or like, that Irish green, what is it, F40 that's out there? Or the Irish green test.
Eugenio's car.
Yeah.
Funny story about that one. One day, so we've been in touch a little bit every now and then, just like, hey. And he said, oh, you painting yours inspired me to paint mine. I was like, oh, no way. Like, I didn't want anyone else to start painting cars, but I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. He did his.
That I think is a good new trend, because one of the things I do love, there are a lot of things I love about Porsche, but I love the fact that they're easy to customize. At least the first, everything from 1964 up to like a 996 is separate of the 996, is pretty much interchangeable. This 964 here is a perfect example of it. So people love to modify Porsches, and they were always modified from back in the the James Dean days all the way through. But most people never really modified Ferraris or Lamborghinis to that extreme, right? They wouldn't even paint them. So I think the fact that you're inspiring people to go paint an F40, which is the holy grail Ferrari for a lot of people, right? It's kind of a cool thing. So
yeah, I think we'll see a lot of more of that sort of thing as time goes on, with people going back, maybe get a 355. Like, I would quite like to see like a resto mod, not like fully done, but like 355 or that sort of era, or maybe a 360, just like played with a bit different, tuned up here, just adjusted. That'd be cool.
I mean, one of the cars I want to do on the list, following on from the E-Type Jag, is I want to do I've always liked the XJS. It's probably like Simon Temple of the Seine. That's probably where it's coming from. And that's one of the cars that I want to hot rod, like an early Series 1. Do like a TWR, Tom Wilkinson Shaw racing street version of a wide-bodied, no-bumper XJS is something that's on my list. And ironically, I was talking to Ian Callum about it a few years ago when he was still at Jag. And he goes, oh, yeah, that's a really pretty cool idea, because he did that hot rod two-door XJ6, right? And then they also built one for Nico McBain, the drummer of Iron Maiden. So, they're kind of into hot rod and things around. One of the coolest drives I ever did actually was a drive to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the XJ series with Jag Classic. And it went from the Jag Classic Center to the Paris Auto Show the long way around. And we drove all 8 generations of that Jag, and all the way up to the current one, which at the time was, I guess, 2020. But it was a really cool drive. So that's back to like, enjoying the moments and places and people and sharing stories and the evolution of things from the beginning to the end, and, which one's your favorite. And I still was going back to the, two-door XJ6 coupe from the 70s was the one I would probably take. Yeah. And I like Jags, I like old things. So I like things with character and soul.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been
thanks for having me on. The only favor I ask, please don't put this out before June 19th.
I won't.
It'll become a big clusterfuck with the Nike guys. But I'm excited about it, and I'm glad you have an interest in it too.
No, it's really exciting. It's really cool. And it's just, like it's one of those things. And we'll make sure it goes right out on the correct date. But
cheers,
thanks very
man.
much.
I appreciate it.